Ah yes, the world of Scrap Mechanic. It's filled to the brim with all sorts of creatures, from humans to deadly farmers. But one of the creatures not many people know about are the ducks. They are sentient, many people think they aren't. They wander around nature, often traveling around, posing as hood ornaments. That's why Tom created the Duck Civilization, a safe place for all ducks, where they have homes and they get taken good care of. Sadly, it goes to war. War breaks out between the Duck Civilization and the close-by Duckman. In this series we will be following the Duck Civilization in preparation of the war and during the war, and what will happen afterwards. Who will win? Jank versus Tank? Let's find out. This is the Duck Civilization at war. Episode 2: Mediocre Tanks. In this episode of the Duck Civilization at War, we will be taking a look at mediocre tanks from our army. Of course, not all tanks are very good or very bad, but some of them are, so in the next episode we'll be looking at the very good and then the very bad. But we will also be taking a look at some of the tanks from Duckman, with a special guest which will be introduced later. We've already talked about the dry bomber in episode 1, but let's go in a little more detail. The dry bomber was, for its time, it was pretty good. It was also the first tank that I made, like real tank, because the jank tank came before that, but do we call that a real tank? Not entirely sure. But it was the first tank with it wasn't the first one with an explosive launcher. It had a good explosive launcher. I mean, a 6-spud is still pretty good, but it had a stronger gun. It was better armored than the jank tank, and it also was the first tank to have tank steering in the Duck Civilization. So far, this tank seems like a real point, like a real important point in the history of the Duck Civilization. The first major tank. But then again, it's the first, so it doesn't do everything very good. It definitely is a good note to start on. It has a 9-spud, which is a very good gun, and not many tanks used it. Definitely not in a lot of my tanks, because most of them were had only one spud gun, and or had a 6-spud, that being the jank tank. Yes. It had a 9-spud, which was very good, and it also had a separate smaller gun, but it wasn't a machine gun. Yeah, it just had a secondary, like, 1-spud gun, which is still a bit of a strange decision. I think I just did it for the looks, and I was like, I'll hook it up to the button. But it's surprising how good it works. I haven't used it in a while, so while recording footage, driving it again for footage, it was surprising to see how good it was. The speed isn't too bad. The turret actually does not get stuck, which is something a lot of tanks have as a problem. No matter what army they're from, I know many Duckman tanks also have their guns often get stuck. The main problem with the dry bomber, which takes it away from being the greatest tank to ever exist, is its armor. It's better than the Jager tank, but it isn't exactly what you would call good, because of its open turret. If a shell flies in there, everything gets knocked out. Like the back half of the dry bomber is very weak. There are all the engines are in the back. The steering mechanism is also back there. The thrusters that help steering the turret, turning the turret. The seat, the gun controls, everything. So if you aim for the turret, it's basically dead in one shot. It also is the main like gun testing tank or target practice tank or Duckman. Our spies have often seen Duckman tanks fire at the dry bomber and then just see it explode and the gun falls off. It's not a nice sight, and that probably made me think in my mind like this tank isn't good at all, but it actually is alright. Yeah, it's not bad, especially for a first tank. Now let's focus on the second tank that was made. It is amazing how I made like the dry bomber and the legendary CL1. The CL1 was a heavy tank which was going to be made as just another unit not based on anything. Yes, I was working on it. I got to the turret, and I started building the turret, and I realized this thing is looking like a KV-2. The KV-2 is a Soviet heavy tank used in World War II. It has been given quite the meme status because of its ridiculous looks and its giant gun. So, I decided to call it the CL1. CL standing for Communism Launcher. Perfect for something that looks this much like the KV-2. The CL1 is fitted out with pretty good armor and a pretty good gun. It has two smaller guns on each side of the tank, which also turn together with turning the tank and fire with the main gun. They're pretty useless. I just love slapping extra unnecessary guns on my tanks. I really, the Duck Civilization is kind of like America in that sense, like how America stuffed machine guns wherever they could. We often slap random spud guns wherever we can. The CL had a 9 spud. Yes, which for its time was pretty good. This came just after the dry bomber. I didn't even realize the dry bomber had a 9 spud until I looked back at it after making the CL. And because of its it had a heavy gun for its time. Now most tanks use a 9 spud. 6 spuds are still used often, but It's most of the time it's a 9. And at the time, I think also most Duckman tanks did not have a 9 spud. I mean, a lot of them had more powerful guns because a lot of them were tank destroyers and they have bigger guns. But for ones that have moving turrets and stuff, it was usually 6. I'm thinking on the top of my head here. I think the Tiger was at the time the only tank with a turnable turret that had a 9 spud. And that gave it quite a status, being this one of the heaviest tanks for its time, and giving it a very big gun also for its time. But now, since tanks have evolved a lot, it isn't that great anymore. It's still a mighty fine tank. Its gun is still very much good. You know, since 6 spuds are still very much in use, 9 spuds are still, they're better than 6 spuds, so yeah, why would they not be used? CL also has a problem with its turret, as I was mentioning earlier. A lot of tanks have this problem, and the CL also has it. There's thrusters to help turn the turret, but doesn't always work out. I know in the footage you can see when we try to turn the turret that it kind of jams. So that is just a problem with a lot of tanks, and the CL is one of them. The next up on the list, it says that we have the Cromwell V. The Cromwell Mark-V is a British cruiser tank, and it has been rebuilt in scrap mechanic. It's one of my favorites. It is a bit out of proportion, but that is not important. What's important is how it works, and it's pretty good. It has a good gun, a 6 spud. Its armor is alright, and it's overall a pretty well-rounded tank. Its speed isn't bad at all, and it made its debut in World War of Scrap. Yes, that was a lot of fun to make, that skit, and I got to use it in sort of some actual combat. I mean, it was all kind of scripted and stuff, but it was still fun, and the shot from the BT at the end kind of also worked as a bit of a test to see how well it holds up against the shots. The answer is half of the tank disintegrates, but that's not the point. The Cromwell is just an alright, all-round good tank, which will probably be used a lot in the war. As the Cromwell is pretty all-rounded, the same goes for the Valentine MK.I. One of the Duck Civilisation's most recent tanks. It is very experimental with its suspension and other features that it has. The main problems with this one is it didn't have to. I thought it didn't have any problems during the Turd, but again, while driving it for the video, for the series, its turret got stuck, and I have no idea why that never happened in its trials. I was just baffled. I thought it might have been the exhaust pipe which was getting in the way. I removed it, still did not turn, so it just kind of gets stuck sometimes, which is strange. So I guess it's just how the tank is feeling. it has a lot of new elements to it. Like its weird suspension system and thrusters to make it go faster. Well, thrusters to make it go faster isn't exactly a new concept. It has been done on the first tank series, which will not be appearing in the good, mediocre, and bad, because most of them, because we're not counting tanks that only have spud guns and have no explosive launchers. It needs to have an explosive launcher to be actually called a tank, because else we're just gonna dub them as tankettes. That's how it goes here in the army. It's kind of how we group them. Yes. Anyway, the Valentine has a weird byproduct. It was very bad at its steering, so I didn't want to up the main engine too much, because I didn't want it to go too fast, because it's an infantry tank. So I decided to up the steering engines. The steering engines are, I think, one gear higher than the main engine, which when you press forward and turn at the same time, you kinda get neutral steering, which is very interesting. So I'll keep that in mind in case I need to use it for future designs. But yeah, the Valentine. It's an alright tank, has a 6 spud and a coaxial machine gun. Its armament is alright. It's one of the newest tanks, so it uses level 5 engines and stuff, which are way harder to destroy than normal engines. So you can take a shot to the side and survive. I don't actually think I have done too many armor tests with the Valentine. I need to do that afterwards. Now then, we have finally made it to our last tank, the Turd. You might be questioning to yourself, what is that name and what is the Turd? It looks very strange, and that's because it has a very specific purpose. The Turd is based off some German tracked transport, which had a bunch of attachments to it, and I just kind of merged them all into one. They were first used, I think, for carrying fuel and ammunition around, like personnel carriers. But then they had a mine in the front. Then they were used as Goliaths for a while, and for the Battle of Berlin, they strapped anti-tank missiles like to the side. So I decided to merge it all together with the Turd. It had an experimental version beforehand, which had very weird, strange wheels, and it did not work out, so I gave it normal wheels. It's one of the few tanks that is also camouflaged. It has a 4 spud, and its main purpose is to carry explosive charges specifically made for it. Yes. If you load on an explosive charge, it can hold it in the front. Then once you make it to your destination, you can open up the front gates, open up, and you drive backwards for the explosive to fall out. Then you move over to the explosive, set a timer for how long you want it to go before it explodes, and then you press the button. Well, you drive away to safety. It's 4 spud gun. It's not very good. It is good enough to deal with tanks. Yes, I did want to give it that tank attachment, because in case it encounters like a tank, I don't think it's going to survive too well, because its armor is not very good. The Turd will definitely be an interesting unit to see in action. It's small and camouflaged, making it hard to see, hopefully making it able to sneak up to bases and blow them up. And that's kind of its entire purpose. So if it fails at that, well, and something which we haven't tested yet, because, you know, we've tested the explosive charges, we've tested its capabilities of driving and stuff, but we have not, you know, we don't actually know how it will turn out in combat, like in its practice. So we'll have to wait and see how that goes. One of the tanks that the Dark Civilization will use are Panthers. The Panther is a medium tank the Germans used in World War II, and they are made by Duckman, and here they are made by Duckman. Already gave me I think, yeah, 10 Panthers to use, and I can use any variant, so the A, the B, and the A, the B, and the Panther Jager, which are all very good tanks. They're all like, you know, they're all right. They're like, as the title suggests, mediocre. But we don't know too much about these Panthers, especially considering that most of the Dark Civilization's crew does not know how to drive them properly. Yeah, Duckman controls are a lot different than Dark Civilization controls, so it doesn't always work out that well. We often press the wrong buttons, fire too early, it's hard for us to aim. So I don't actually know how many we're going to use. But, yeah, we don't know too much about how the Panther, like, works. So we decided to go to someone who knows a bit more about the Panther, and who would know better than its own creator.
The Panther Duck A was built after we had lost some of, well, we had started building it when we did not yet have a war in mind. Yet, they became the backbone of the Duckman army somewhere in the beginning of the year, or yeah, during the summer of the year we had built them. And at that time they seemed really good tanks, but they soon got outclassed by the very next one built, which was the Tiger Duck 1A. Even the B, who has more armor, its armor is not very effective against defending it, and most of the time it just blows up just the same as the A. We decided to build the Panthers after our army had lost all of their previous Panthers, which was kind of a shittier version of the now existing Panther. Its turret is controlled by a controller, making it not accurate, and since it only has a gun with a caliber of 6 SP, it doesn't really, well, shoot far.
So, even with giving the Dark Civilization 10 Panthers, they don't have much of an advantage.
Not really, unless you count, well, we do count, the few that we gave them, the Panther Duck Jagers. The Panther Duck Jagers were built before the Panthers, so don't get me wrong. The Panther Duck Jagers were tank destroyer versions of the original Panther Duck, which all of those have been destroyed. But the Panther Jager can be used as a very powerful tank destroyer and can fire very long range. Its only real downside is that it is a very large target. Well, maybe not, but the biggest problem is its speed, which is very, very low.
Alright, now, you mentioned the Tiger earlier, so let's go talking about that.
The Tiger was built somewhere after the Panther's construction. The Tiger, unlike the Panther, has a long range and is a very reliable tank. It is very accurate and can also be fired at close range as well as long range. We've had an instant of killing an enemy tank over a hill with a Tiger, which was probably just a lucky shot, but it happened. The Tiger is a very powerful tank, as we said. Its caliber is 9 SP, so not too big, because most tanks these days have 9 SP. But it is a pretty good tank. I wouldn't call his armor the best, but it has a decent speed, and well, I'm pretty sure if you would ask Tom about it, that he would kind of think that the Tiger is, well, bullshit.
Every time that thing shows up, there's like a magical aura around it, making it impossible to hit, and once it hits you once, you're dead.
What I do remember is that off the production line, or doing testing somewhere, the Dutch Civilisation army managed to capture a Tiger. So they do, on top of 10 Panthers, have a single Tiger.
Yes, it was quite lucky. Now, I assume... Well, I mean, we just talked about a bunch of tanks, which also the Duck Civilization has, but, of course, Duckman also has some of its own tanks that aren't shared with the Duck Civilization.
Yes! Maybe take... Oh, this is hard. We haven't a lot of tanks, so... The IS-2. The IS-2 is our newest tank. It rolled off the production line, I think, a few days ago. The first example rolled off. Was tested. It has a little problem with its turret turning, which cannot be fixed. We tried our best. But it does have a caliber of, let me think real quick, I actually don't really know. I think it's an 11 SP. So it is not as powerful as most tanks. It's at least more powerful than the Tiger. It has maybe not the best armor. Its armor was more or less sacrificed for its weight because it was be very heavy, and yeah, that wouldn't be the best. Its turret already has problems turning, you know. So if you would have made it more heavy, it would just be catastrophic. So that's the IS-2. But then we still have a lot of other tanks to our over. The Stud. The Stud is one we could talk about. When the Panthers were destroyed, the Stud was also lost. The Stud 1. We still want to rebuild and remanufacture the Stud. We just have to find blueprints back for it, so we can rebuild it. But the Stud 2 has come into production since then, and is pretty reliable. It is a small, quick vehicle that has a powerful cannon. It cannot aim up and down, But it will be used for hit and run attacks, probably.
And that concludes this episode of the Duck Civilization at War. Hopefully you enjoyed hearing about the different kinds of tanks on our side and on the enemy's side. We'll be looking forward to seeing you next time, where we'll be talking about the best tanks in the Duck Civilization army. Isn't that like all of them? Oh, bugger off.